I was never the kind of man who asked for help. I grew up watching my dad work 2 jobs at the same time without complaining once. He woke up at 5 in the morning, came home at 9 at night, ate dinner in silence, and did it all over again the next day. I never heard him complain, never saw him ask anyone for anything, and somehow, without him ever saying a single word about it, I learned that a man handles what comes his way and keeps moving. So when things started falling apart in my life, I did what I'd been taught. I put my head down and kept walking. My name is Raphael. I'm 34 years old. And for almost 2 years, I lived inside a marriage that was eating me alive so slowly that I didn't realize how much of myself I'd lost, till the day I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the man staring back at me. Camilla and I got married when we were 28. It was the kind of relationship that looked perfect from the outside. Nice photos on social media, vacations planned in advance, an apartment we decorated together, picking out every single detail. We had plans laid out with an almost naive precision. Kids by 32, our own house by 35, a life built around a script we'd written together one night over wine and hope. But life, as I found out the hard way, doesn't follow anyone's script. When I lost my job in March of 2022, my first instinct was to hide the panic. I was let go in a company restructuring. It wasn't my performance, wasn't a mistake I made. It was just one of those cold corporate cuts that reminds you that you're nothing but a number on a spreadsheet. I got the notice on a Friday afternoon by email. An email. 8 years of dedication, of showing up early, of staying late. And it came by email. I spent the entire weekend pretending to Camilla that I was exploring other opportunities, while on the inside I was in free fall. By Monday, I was already sending out resumes for anything I could find. Good positions, mediocre ones, jobs I knew were below what I was capable of. It didn't matter. I needed a job. I needed to feel useful again. The first 3 months were rough, but I still had savings. I paid the bills, kept the household running, picked up some freelance consulting work on the side just to stay busy. But the market was locked up, interviews weren't going anywhere, and the money started drying up like water in a cracked glass, slowly at first, then all at once. Camilla worked as a marketing coordinator at a decent company. She didn't make enough to support both of us at the standard we'd built, and that imbalance created a tension that neither of us named out loud, but that was present at every dinner, every weekend, every conversation about money we tried to have without fighting, and always ended in a frozen silence. First came the small comments, almost surgical in how precisely they hurt. "We can't go on that trip this year, right?" Said in a tone that wasn't shared sadness, it was quiet accusation. I had chosen to be in this situation. Then came the comparisons. Fernanda's husband just bought a new car. Pause. Nothing else. Just the comparison left hanging in the air for me to draw my own conclusions. I tried to talk to her, tried to explain that I was doing everything I could, that the market was difficult, that it was only a matter of time. But she gradually stopped seeing me as a partner going through a rough patch and started seeing me as a problem she was being forced to manage. The intimacy faded, not all at once. It was like a tide pulling back without you noticing, and then suddenly you look over and the sand is completely dry. We slept in the same bed, shared the same bathroom, ate at the same table, but there was a distance between us that had nothing to do with physical space. And it was in that atmosphere that the dinner happened. It was a Saturday night in August. She invited me to dinner with 2 couples she knew. People I barely recognized, all connected to her corporate world. The kind of people who measure others by their LinkedIn title and what car they drive. I went because I was still trying. Because I still believed that being a good husband meant showing up even when you didn't want to be there. The restaurant was one of those places with low lighting and no prices on the menu. The kind of place that signals, before you even walk through the door, that the night is going to be expensive. I smiled, greeted everyone, and played the part that's expected of you at a dinner like that. The conversation moved exactly the way I knew it would. Someone mentioned a trip to Europe they were planning. Someone else brought up exchange rates, talked about how everything was getting expensive, and it all naturally slid into that territory of achievements and possessions that I had no way to navigate anymore. One of the men casually mentioned he'd just traded in his car. The woman next to him smiled with the pride of someone sharing a victory. And then one of them looked straight at me and asked with the kind of innocent curiosity that has no idea it's walking into a trap, "So, Raphael, Where are you working these days? I opened my mouth to answer, and before a single word came out, Camilla gave a half smile, that slightly awkward smile of someone who's about to crack a joke they think is funny, looked over at me and said, with a casual lightness that hurts so much more than a scream ever could, "He's broke," and laughed. Silence. The kind of silence you feel on your skin that rolls down the table and lands on everyone at the same time. The others looked away almost simultaneously. One of the women reached for her water glass. The man who had asked stared at his plate. Someone coughed. I smiled. Because that's what you do when you don't know what else to do. When the pain is too big to fit inside a public reaction. When you still have at least 2 more hours inside that restaurant and you can't afford to fall apart. I changed the subject, asked about the Europe trip, pretended to care, ate dinner I couldn't taste, asked for the check when the time came. But inside, something had broken in a way I didn't yet have words for. It wasn't anger. The anger came later. It was that specific pain that hits when you understand, all at once and completely, that the person who was supposed to be your safe place was actually ashamed of you, that she didn't just think that. She thought it was fine to say out loud, in front of other people, with a laugh as if I wasn't even worth basic consideration, as if my humiliation was just a minor detail. On the way home, neither of us said a word. She was on her phone the whole drive. I stared straight ahead, pretending there was a point on the horizon that needed my full attention. When we got home, she went straight to the bathroom and I went to the bedroom. I lay down in the dark and stared at the ceiling for hours. I remember going back through the memories of our marriage, trying to find the exact moment when things had become this, trying to pinpoint where love had been replaced by convenience, where respect had slipped into contempt. And the more I searched, the more I realized there was no single moment. It had been a collection of small ones I'd chosen to overlook, because I believed the marriage was bigger than all of them. But that night showed me it wasn't. It was in that early morning, alone in the dark, that I made a quiet and absolute decision. I was going to rebuild my life. Not to prove something to her. Not to get revenge. Because I realized I had spent months trying to be enough for someone who had stopped seeing me as an equal. And every bit of energy I put in that direction was energy stolen from myself. Here's a piece of advice, a tip, a lesson for you. If you're going through a hard time right now, financially, professionally, emotionally, and you're being torn down by the person who should be supporting you, I want you to understand something that took me a long time to truly learn. Shame is a weapon, and people only use it against those they've already decided don't deserve their respect. When someone uses you as the punchline, especially in front of others, that says absolutely nothing about your real value. It says everything about the emptiness inside the person who did it. People who are secure, people who genuinely love you, don't need to make you smaller to feel bigger. The mistake I made, and that I see so many people repeat, was continuing to try to prove my worth to someone who had already decided I had none. I spent months justifying myself, trying to be enough, trying to convince someone who didn't want to be convinced anymore. And all of that cost me time, energy, and self-worth I didn't have to spare. What actually changed my life was when I stopped looking sideways for validation and started looking forward. In practice, I did a few simple things that made a massive difference. First, I got honest about my finances, without judgment, without beating myself up for being where I was. Just a straightforward spreadsheet. What's coming in, what's going out, what can be cut. Clarity before strategy. Second, I completely changed my approach to the job search. I stopped spraying resumes everywhere like it was a numbers game. I got specific. I picked 20 companies I was genuinely interested in, researched each one, found people who worked there on LinkedIn, and reached out asking for a simple conversation. Not asking for a job, just a connection. In 3 weeks of doing that, I got more real traction than in 5 months of the old approach. But the most important thing, and this is what I most want you to take away from this, was when I stopped waiting for emotional permission to recover. I didn't need Camilla to believe in me in order to believe in myself. I had outsourced my confidence to her approval, and when that approval disappeared, I collapsed with it. I never made that mistake again. Your recovery doesn't need anyone's sign-off, especially not from the person who knocked you down. 2 months after that dinner, I got called in for an interview at a tech startup. One I'd found through exactly the method I just described, through a connection I'd made in a LinkedIn conversation. I made it to the second round, then the third, then the fourth, which was a presentation to the company's leadership team. I remember walking out of that presentation without knowing the result, sitting in my car in the parking garage and staying quiet for about 5 minutes. Not out of anxiety, out of a strange calm I hadn't felt in a long time. I'd done well, and I knew that regardless of what they decided. The following Thursday, I got the call. It wasn't just a job. It was a product leadership role, with a salary 20% higher than what I'd been making before the layoff plus profit sharing. The HR person on the line sounded genuinely excited. I thanked her calmly and hung up. I sat in my home office chair, that small room Camilla had turned into a junk room while I'd been home, and stayed still for a while. I thought about my dad. I thought about the late nights sending out resumes. I thought about that dinner. Then I got up, walked to the kitchen and told Camilla. Her reaction is burned into my memory with a clarity that still gets to me. It wasn't joy. Her face didn't break into a real smile, the kind that arrives before you decide to smile. It was relief, immediate, almost physical relief, like someone who had been holding something heavy for too long and finally got to set it down. And in that moment, looking at her, I understood something with a clarity that both hurts and frees you at the same time. She wasn't happy for me. She was relieved for herself, for the lifestyle that would return, for the problem that had been solved. I wasn't a partner being celebrated. I was an equation that had returned to balance. I saw in that instant that we were no longer partners. Maybe we never had been the way I'd always believed. In the months that followed, I threw myself into work with an energy I didn't know I still had. I reconnected with friends who had faded during the hard months and found that the real ones were exactly where I'd left them. No questions asked. I started running again, something I'd quit without realizing it. I started reading again. I started recognizing myself again. The distance between Camilla and me grew naturally, almost organically, not through fighting, not through drama, but through truth. We became two very polite strangers, sharing an apartment. We talked about bills, about the HOA fees, about what we needed from the grocery store, about nothing that actually mattered. One Sunday night, an ordinary one, nothing special to market. We were sitting on the couch watching a show, and I looked over at her and thought, I don't want this anymore. Not with anger, not with sharp bitterness, with the quiet clarity that only shows up when you finally stop lying to yourself. 3 weeks later, we had the conversation. She cried. More than I expected. She said she'd been wrong, that she knew she'd been wrong, that that night at the restaurant had been cruel of her. And I believed that she believed what she was saying. But believing in someone's regret doesn't mean the path back exists. Sometimes a mistake reveals something that was already there. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The separation was clean on paper, painful in the middle of the night. But clean. I left the apartment with 2 suitcases, a box of books, and a feeling it took me a few days to correctly identify. It wasn't sadness, it was lightness. The specific lightness of someone who stops carrying a weight that had become so familiar it no longer felt like a weight. It felt like part of the body. And only when you put it down do you realize how long you'd been walking bent over. Today, a year and a few months later, I live in a smaller apartment that is completely mine. Every object in it was chosen by me, placed where I wanted it, with no negotiating, no compromising. It's a simple space and it's entirely mine. And some days I come home after work and stand in the doorway for just a second, just feeling that. I have a life I built from scratch with my own hands without needing to prove anything to anyone. Sometimes I think about that dinner, about the silence that settled over the table after her joke, about the way I smiled when what I wanted was to disappear, and I'm grateful for that moment, because it woke me up. Not gently. It was a bucket of cold water to the face at 2 a.m, but it woke me up. Some people can only recognize what they have when they see someone else noticing what they stopped seeing long ago. Camilla realized what she'd done when it was already too late for that realization to change anything between us. But that part of the story doesn't belong to me anymore. I don't carry it. The part I carry is this. I was destroyed on the inside. I stayed quiet for months, and I rebuilt myself alone, one day at a time, with no audience and no applause. And if you're in the middle of that process right now, in the dark, not knowing if there's a way out, exhausted from giving everything to someone who doesn't see the effort, I'm telling you with everything I've got, you will get through it. But you have to decide to do it for yourself, not to prove something to whoever tore you down, not to get back at them. For you. Rebuilding sets you free. Revenge keeps you anchored to the past. Freedom starts when you stop needing the person who hurt you to understand how much they hurt you. That was the day I truly began.